The Vampire's Penthouse. I had my Dragon Tier patrons vote on some thumbnail sketches. Of the 4 images provided, the one that won this round was the Vampire Penthouse. I won't show the rest yet, because there are still some on here that I'd like to finish. My primary purpose with illustrations like these is to stress test what I've learned so far. Can I create a story-driven image using the tools I've already uncovered, like Art Deco-inspired architecture, and the advanced technology and skills available? In this shot, a watcher tosses a sacrifice off of his penthouse at the top of a grand temple, while his guests remain unfazed. It's meant to explore some of the decadence and callousness of this culture. For the figures, I didn't have any specific plans for their poses or locations at the beginning. Using some loose skeletons, I was able to quickly block them in, thinking about little stories as I went. A couple of guests sit near the table, some dance to music being played from off-screen, and a servant bows to the looming watcher as he tosses his sacrifice over the edge. Once I'm happy with the poses and placement of the skeletons, I can begin to add the rest of them. I admire artists that have the confidence to leap straight into drawing figures, but I still prefer to take a systematic approach. If the skeleton's pose works, then I can feel confident stitching muscle onto it. Once all of the figures were completed, it was time for costumes. But I didn't feel prepared. I've drawn clothed figures for this project many times, but it's always been in a hand-waving, I'll get to it later kind of a way. Now that we've established Art Deco as one of our primary sources of inspiration, I wanted to see if I could design some semi-official outfits. For this first step, I was looking at a wide array of Art Deco photos and fashion sketches, taking very loose inspiration from them. I was focusing on costumes that were intended to make a big impact, showstoppers. Some of them worked better than others. Some were simply too anachronistic, too modern. Ultimately, I didn't use any of them specifically. Instead, I tried to use smaller elements and the overall design philosophy. Each character got their own outfit, designed with their pose and overall context in mind. I wanted a lot of flowing, light fabrics, a few big flashy displays of wealth or influence, and some small hints at the prehistoric creatures available. For the Watcher, I really wanted to give him a coat instead of a robe. One thing I'll be wrestling with for a long time is where the line of anachronism is for me. By virtue of drawing on Art Deco for inspiration, the anachronism ship has sailed. But there's still a point where it goes too far. I still want this world to be believable as its own thing. In this form, the vampire jaguar coat just felt too contemporary. I'll swing around and revisit it in the line work stage. To finish off the sketch phase, I moved on to the background. Nothing too crazy here. Its main job is to help establish that the penthouse is hundreds of feet above the ground. A winding river helps to show a vast open world, and some very tiny boats help to reinforce that huge sense of scale. And far off in the distance, how could I resist sprinkling a couple of power-generating pyramids out there? Now for the final line work. For more complicated images like this, with multiple figures interacting with an environment, it's always daunting at the start. But line by line, the finish line comes faster than you think. It helps to be drawing towards something you love. The rooftop is supported by these 4 figure pillars. Below, guests have been leaving empty glasses. Perhaps the servant who would normally pick them up found themselves at the bottom of the temple very, very suddenly. All of the important information should be figured out at the pencil stage, so at this point it's really just a matter of cleaning things up and adding fun details. This is where I enjoy indulging in small-scale design, with jewelry, clothing, props, and just about everything else. The challenge is spending the right amount of time enjoying the details, while also getting each image done in a reasonable time. My previous project, Tellurian, helped to hammer that into me. I gave myself the goal of releasing at least 1 image a week. Some were very simple, others were ridiculously complex, but my own deadline didn't move. I was forced to think smarter, to find ways to say more with less. That is a lot easier when you know what story you're trying to tell. Every detail that doesn't say something to support the story or to build up the setting can be thrown off the side. At this point, it was time to address the jaguar coat. My goal is to make sure this watcher still looked like a decadent vampire wizard, but avoid robes, hoods, long hanging sleeves, capes. You know, all that wizard stuff. So I tried cutting this coat a little differently, giving it an exaggerated split yoke, adding a heavy embellished rope belt, and making it longer overall. He wears 10th century bracelets on his right arm, proudly displaying his 1,000 years of life. I also gave him some flowing linen pants to show that this watcher doesn't mind enjoying the spoils of his godhood. At this point, all the foreground line work was complete. I took a break for the evening, which gave me time to think about this image. I decided that while the background was fine, it really isn't as important to this image overall. And the important information, the watcher and his party guests, didn't have as much screen space as they really deserved. So I decided to crop the image, getting closer to the party. I had to lower the penthouse roof to make sure that it was still looming in the frame, but otherwise nothing of serious consequence was lost. From here I could move on to color. I like to start with the diffuse colors. What would the base color of everything be if it was put in a scanner? From there I apply consistent curve adjustments to each layer that change the brightness and also the color. I can then add curve adjustments for the lights, and I want to have a strong underlighting coming from the city below. The world of Dead Gods has a very dense, humid atmosphere, so as usual, I'm leaning on screen layers to create depth in the background. This also helps to make sure that the important silhouettes read loud and clear. I added another light source coming from deeper inside the penthouse, as well as a sliver of full moonlight that just touches the edge of the floor. Once all of these elements are in place, I spend a lot of time balancing things, making highlights and shadows brighter or darker, adding reflections where they're beneficial, adding important story details like the blood flowing down the side of the temple. One of the last things I'll do is adjust the overall color grading of the image. Ideally, the image is fairly well balanced before you start this, otherwise you start digging yourself into a color pit you're not likely to climb out of. I like to increase the overall contrast, darken the darks, lighten the highlights. I also like to shift the color slightly, as I find it really ties the whole image together. So here's the final image. A vampire's temple penthouse party and his guests enjoying life at the top. You can help this project. Click the buttons, leave a comment, go to my website, buy a book or a print, follow me on stuff. Sign up on Patreon. Thank you all so much for the support you've already shown. It's been overwhelming. And a special thank you to my Dragon Tier patrons. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.